The 7th Engineering Team gave up on a Tuesday. I know it was Tuesday because I had been counting them, the teams, not the days, though by that point both were piling up in roughly the same way. 7 teams in 6 weeks, 41 engineers between them, carrying instruments I couldn't name and wearing uniforms from 4 different systems. I watched the last one pack his cases from my spot on berth 12's upper scaffold, 40 meters above the dock floor, where I had been crouched since early morning welding a patch on the hull plating of the ISV Varathos. Nobody down there looked up at me. I was part of the scaffolding as far as they were concerned. The Varathos was a Kale Fleet warship, one of the big ones, 1.5 kilometers of dark alloy hull and forward gun housing and engine nacelles the size of grain silos. She had come into Oroville shipyard 6 weeks ago with a jammed main orientation ring. Not a broken ring, not a shattered one. Jammed. The ring was physically intact, fully powered and completely frozen at 11 degrees off-center. She could not dock properly, could not deploy her forward guns in combat arc, and could not run her navigation stack at full capacity until it freed. A warship that cannot dock or aim is a very expensive problem. Fleet Admiral Sareth Kale had made that clear to berth manager Tolan the first day, in a tone that Tolan had described to me afterward as quiet but geological. I had been at Oroville for 9 months at that point on a hull repair contract. Patch plating, seal checks, weld seam inspections. Work the yard's own crew didn't want to do because it meant dangling over a drop in a cold drydock breathing alloy dust for 11 hours. I didn't mind it. I had done worse. I pressed my helmet faceplate against the hull and went back to my patch. The 8th team arrived on Thursday. I did not hear their briefing, but I heard the ring. You can hear it from the scaffolding if you know to listen. A low harmonic that pulses through the hull plating in irregular intervals, like a clock that keeps almost catching its rhythm and missing. I had been listening to it for 6 weeks. I had been listening to machines for longer than that, 38 years, starting with my mother's industrial lathe in a garage in a city that no longer existed, and working forward through every engine, press, generator, and orbital docking mechanism I had ever put my hands on. You learn to hear the difference between a machine that is broken and a machine that is arguing with itself. The Varathos ring was arguing with itself. Something was binding the rotation, and the bind had a frequency, and that frequency told you something about where. I knew where. I had known for about 4 weeks. I had not said anything because nobody had asked me. I was the hull patch woman. I was part of the scaffolding. The 8th team spent 9 days on the ring. They ran every diagnostic the Kale Fleet's engineering corps carried. They brought in a secondary scanner array from a support ship in the outer berth and spent 2 full days mapping the ring's internal geometry to sub-millimeter tolerances. They modeled the bind in 4 different simulation frameworks. On the 9th day, I watched their team lead, a tall figure with pale silver-gray skin and the kind of quiet authority that comes from being right a great many times, fold his display tablet under his arm and walk the length of the dock floor without looking back. His junior engineers followed. One of them glanced up at my scaffold as they passed beneath it. I was eating my lunch. He looked away. On the 5th week I had climbed down and spoken to the junior Kale liaison officer, a young officer named Sevet, who managed the yard-side paperwork, and told him what I thought I was hearing from the ring. He had listened with the attentive, slightly pained expression of someone managing a schedule problem they cannot share. He wrote something on his display. He thanked me. He did not pass it up the chain, or if he did, the chain had not found it worth acting on. The hull patch woman on the berth 12 scaffold had an opinion about the fleet warship. That was noted. That was the whole of it. I went back up the scaffold and kept listening. Berth manager Tolan called me on my comm unit at the end of the 6th week, while I was cleaning my tools. She sounded like a person who had been having a long argument with herself and had finally lost. "Marsh," she said. Yes, the Kale team is recommending a partial disassembly. Remove the ring housing entirely, replace it in sections. They're saying 6 to 8 months and a fabrication order from the central yards. That's a lot, I said. Fleet Admiral Kale does not want to wait 6 to 8 months. I set down my calibration mallet. It was a rubber-faced tool, nothing fancy, the kind of thing you use to coax metal into compliance when you don't want to mar a surface. I had carried it since my second year working orbital maintenance on the old platform rigs. It had a crack in the handle that I had wrapped with insulation tape, and the tape had been there so long it was part of the handle now. "Has anyone tried tapping the ring?" I said. Silence on the line. "Tapping it," she said. "Along the inner curve, at specific intervals. The bind has a frequency. I've been listening to it from the scaffold for 5 weeks. It's a pinch warp in the lower port sector of the track channel, not the ring itself. The track is distorted in a crescent, maybe 8 centimeters of actual contact fault. The ring can't push through it under power because power makes the warp grip harder. But if you tap it free at the right point, marsh, the bind releases, ring turns on its own." Another silence, longer. "I need you to understand," Tolan said carefully, "that I am about to tell Fleet Admiral Sarath Kale that the 8 engineering teams he flew in from 4 systems could not do what my hull patch contractor is going to solve with a rubber mallet." "Do you want me to put it differently?" "No," she said. "I want you to go do it tomorrow, before he sends for a 9th team." I was on the dock floor at first light. The Varathos up close was a different thing from the Varathos seen from the scaffold. From up high she was geometry, angles and curves and hull section seams, the problems of scale translated into solvable tasks. Down here she was weight. The forward housing alone threw a shadow wide enough to swallow the whole dock floor and half the adjacent berth. I stood at the base of the orientation ring housing and tipped my head back and thought about what 1.5 kilometers of Warship must feel like to the people who built it, and the people who crewed it, and the people who had flown in from 4 systems and still couldn't fix it. I thought about it for about 15 seconds, then I opened my kit bag. The ring housing access panel was a standard configuration hatch, which I was grateful for. I had spent 40 minutes the night before reviewing the Varathos' maintenance schematic on the yard's reference system, and the track channel access points were where I had expected them to be. I pulled the first panel and crouched in. The channel smelled of ozone and cool metal, and a faint chemical note I didn't recognize, probably a sealant compound the Kale fleet used. I didn't need to recognize it. I needed to find a crescent-shaped warp in the lower port sector of the track wall. I ran my gloved fingers along the channel wall at the height where the ring's drive collar would sit. I moved slowly, about 5 centimeters at a time. This is the part that is difficult to explain to someone who has not done it. You are not looking for something you can see. You are looking for a deviation in texture, a slight resistance change, a place where the metal has absorbed stress and redistributed it into the surface. You feel it before you see it. You learn to feel it by doing it wrong enough times that, eventually, you stop doing it wrong. My mother called it listening with your hands. She had been repairing industrial machinery in a city on a continent that does not exist in the same form anymore, and she had taught me by putting my palms flat against the housing of a cold lathe press and asking me what I felt. "Nothing," I had said. She said, "Wait. The metal is patient. You have to be more patient than the metal." I was 9 years old and I did not entirely believe her. By 30, I believed her completely. 4 minutes in, I found it. It was a crescent, as I had estimated. 8 centimeters of channel wall where the alloy had warped inward by less than 2 millimeters under stress. Probably a docking impact the ship had taken months or years before the current service period. Something too small to log. Something that had been slowly tightening its grip on the ring's drive collar every time the ring tried to turn under power, until it was gripping firmly enough that power only made it worse. I took out my calibration mallet. I tapped the channel wall twice at the left edge of the crescent, light taps, just locating, and felt the frequency of the bind shift through the tool handle. I moved 3 centimeters right. Tapped again. The shift was cleaner. I moved 1 more centimeter. I held the mallet still and waited for the harmonic I had been listening to from the scaffold for 5 weeks, and felt it come up through the channel floor and into my knees. There. I struck once, with the full flat face of the mallet at medium force, at the exact center of the warp. The sound was not dramatic. It was a dull ring, the kind of sound a bell makes if you wrap the clapper in cloth. Then a settling. Then, from somewhere deep in the ring housing above me, a second sound, a low, fluid rotation, like a gear train catching its first tooth after a very long wait. I sat back on my heels and listened to it turn. It took 11 minutes from the time I opened the access panel. I had climbed back out of the housing and was putting my tools away when I heard the dock floor go quiet. Not the ordinary quiet of a shipyard at an off hour. The quiet of people stopping what they were doing because something unexpected had changed in the air. I looked up. Fleet Admiral Sareth Kale was walking across the dock floor toward me. I had seen him before from the scaffold, a tall figure, silver-skinned in the way of the Kale bloodline, which meant not silver like metal but silver like water moving in low light. He wore his fleet dress in the way of someone who had worn it for so long it had become skin. 2 officers followed him at a careful distance, the way officers follow a man they are slightly afraid of. He stopped 3 meters from me and looked at the orientation ring housing, which was emitting the soft, even rotation sound of a mechanism finally doing what it was designed to do. Then he looked at me. I was dusty. I had a grease mark on my left forearm from the panel hatch, and the insulation tape handle of my mallet was sticking out of my kit bag. I looked like what I was. "You are Marsh," he said. It was not a question. "Yes, sir." "You have been on the berth 12 scaffold since the 14th of last month." "Yes, sir." "Doing hull plate welding." "Yes, sir." He was quiet for a moment, his eyes pale, with that slight luminous quality the Kale line carried, moved from me to the housing and back. "How long did you know?" he said. I considered the most accurate answer, 4 weeks. His 2 officers exchanged a look behind him. I kept my eyes on the Admiral. "Why did you not come forward?" "I'm a hull patch contractor, sir. Nobody asked me about the ring." Another silence. He clasped his hands behind his back, a gesture that looked like composure but was something more complicated underneath. "I am going to ask berth manager Tolan to draw up a fleet maintenance contract," he said. "Standing offer. Kale Fleet Engineering Corps, Civilian Technical Division. You would name your terms." I picked up my kit bag. "That's very generous, sir," I said. "But I've got 14 hull panels still to finish on berth 14. They're waiting on me." He looked at me for a long moment. I did not look away, but I did not push against the look either. I just waited, the way you wait beside a machine that is working out what it wants to do next. "The hull panels," he said. "The hull panels," I said. He nodded once. It was a small nod, tight at the chin, the kind that means more than it looks. Then he turned and walked back across the dock floor, and his 2 officers fell into step behind him, and the yard noise came back up in a slow wave as people returned to their work. I shouldered my kit bag and walked back to the scaffold. The ring was still turning when I reached the upper level. I could feel it through the soles of my boots on the platform, a deep, steady pulse, even and patient, the sound of something that had been waiting a long time to do its job and was finally, quietly doing it. I put on my welding mask and went back to my patch.